Something happened in the sky last night, and I want to talk about what followed. Not what was predicted, not what was supposed to happen. What I am actually observing in the first 24 hours since the lunar eclipse perfected at 12 degrees Virgo. I have been monitoring the tracking group since midnight, and I have been paying attention to my own experience, and I have been reading the comments on last night's eclipse video. And there is a pattern forming that I did not anticipate. Stay with me on this because the pattern is different from what I expected, and the difference is informative. Before I get into the observations, I want to establish a frame for today. The eclipse happened last night, but the eclipse is not over. What perfected last night was the astronomical event. The moon entered Earth's shadow. The borrowed light was removed. The blood moon hung in the sky, and then the shadow released, and the moon returned to its normal illumination. That sequence took about 4 hours. But the astrological eclipse, the reading it delivers, the material it surfaces, that process takes approximately 2 weeks to complete. Last night was the exposure, a camera shutter opening, the light hitting the film. Today begins the developing, the image emerging slowly in the chemical bath. You are going to see things over the next 14 days that connect back to last night. Details that were not visible in the initial flash. Edges that sharpen. Parts of the picture that seemed unclear at midnight that resolve into focus by March 10th or 15th. So today is not about conclusions. Today is about first readings, initial signals, the earliest marks on the film. Here is what I am observing. The most common report I received this morning falls into a category I was not expecting. People are not reporting dramatic revelations. They are not reporting that everything changed. What they are reporting, with remarkable consistency across the group, is a strange quality of morning after clarity. Not euphoric clarity, not the bright, sharp clarity of a breakthrough. Quiet clarity, calm. A sense that something settled during the night. Like a room after a party, the noise is gone. The guests have left. And in the silence you can see the room for what it actually is. Which pictures are crooked? Which furniture has been moved? Which glass has a crack you never noticed when the music was playing? Several people used almost identical language to describe this. The phrase I am hearing most frequently is, "I can see what was already there." Not something new appeared. Something old became visible. That is consistent with what I described in the eclipse mechanics video. The eclipse removes borrowed light. It does not create new objects in the room. It changes the lighting so you see the existing objects without the flattering filter. The tracking group is showing 3 distinct signal patterns in the first 24 hours, and these match what I described in the personal map video. I want to walk through each because they correspond to the 3 signs I told you to watch for, and the correspondence is worth documenting in real time. Signal 1, the intolerance signal. Multiple people woke up this morning with a sudden, sharp inability to tolerate something they have been tolerating for months. One person described it as opening their laptop to start their usual morning work routine and feeling a physical recoil. Not from the work itself, from one specific aspect of the work that has been draining them for most of the past year. They knew it was draining. They had been tolerating it. And this morning, the tolerance evaporated. They described it as something in the word tolerance itself just disappeared. Not the situation, the ability to endure the situation. as if a switch flipped overnight. That switch is the eclipse doing its work in the sixth house, which governs daily routines and work systems. Another person reported the same intolerance signal, but aimed at a relationship dynamic. A pattern of accommodation they have been running with a family member for years that this morning felt impossible to continue. Not anger, not frustration, just done. The fuel that kept the accommodation running ran out overnight. And a third person experienced it in relation to a physical habit, a way of eating or sleeping or managing stress that they knew was not serving them, but had maintained through sheer momentum. This morning, the momentum died. The habit that took effort to maintain suddenly required more effort than it was worth. I want to be precise about why this happens mechanically. The borrowed light that the eclipse removed was the energy source maintaining certain tolerances. We tolerate things we should not tolerate by unconsciously investing energy into the tolerance itself. Maintaining the fiction that the draining pattern is fine, sustaining the accommodation, keeping the momentum alive for a habit that has outlived its function. When the eclipse removes the borrowed light, it also removes the unconscious energy investment that was keeping the tolerance alive. What remains is the raw reality, and the raw reality is intolerable. Not because it got worse, because you stopped unconsciously funding its continuation. If you are experiencing this signal today, pay attention to what became intolerable. That is the eclipse pointing at what needs to change. Do not act on it yet, but do document it. The intolerance signal is the eclipse's most reliable first indicator, and what it points at rarely turns out to be wrong. Signal 2, the simplification signal. This is the one I find most interesting because it is the most Virgo of the three. Several people are reporting that a decision they have been stuck on for weeks or months suddenly simplified. The complexity collapsed. Not because new information arrived, because the excess information, the noise, the borrowed perspectives, the opinions of others, the fear-based considerations, all of that dropped away overnight, and what remained was the actual decision stripped to its essential components. One person had been going back and forth about relocating for a job opportunity for nearly 3 months. This morning they woke up, and the decision was obvious. Not because the pros and cons changed, because the lens through which they were evaluating the pros and cons changed. The eclipse cleaned the lens. What was left was the actual calculation, without the emotional interference pattern that had been making it seem more complicated than it was. If a decision simplified for you today, trust the simplified version. That is not your judgment being impaired by eclipse energy. That is your judgment being restored to its unfiltered state. Signal 3, the exhale signal. This is the most physical of the three, and the one that takes the longest to recognize because it does not announce itself. The exhale signal is the feeling that something you have been carrying was set down sometime during the night, and you did not notice until the weight was gone. It manifests as an unusual lightness, not happiness necessarily, lightness, like the difference between wearing a heavy coat and not wearing one. You do not feel the coat being removed. You feel the air on your skin afterward. Some people in the tracking group described waking up feeling lighter without being able to identify what had changed. One person said they checked their situation, their job, their relationship, their health, their finances, and nothing had changed externally. But something internal had shifted. They described it as a quiet permission to stop holding something they did not realize they were holding. If you feel this signal, do not try to identify what was released. Not The identification comes later in the 2-week window. For now, just notice the lightness and let it be. I want to distinguish between real eclipse shifts and post-eclipse emotional residue because both are present right now and they feel different. Eclipse shifts are quiet. They settle. They simplify. They produce the signals I just described: intolerance, simplification, lightness. They have a quality of resolution. Post-eclipse residue is louder. It is the emotional processing of the eclipse event itself, the anxiety from the buildup that is not yet fully discharged, the sleep disruption, the heightened sensitivity. The residue feels unsettled, fragmented, reactive. It is not signal. It is the echo of the event passing through your system. The residue clears within 48 to 72 hours. The eclipse shifts remain and deepen over 2 weeks. If what you are feeling today is noisy and reactive, that is residue. Let it pass. Do not make decisions from it. If what you are feeling today is quiet and clear, that is the eclipse. Document it. Trust it. The distinction matters enormously for how you navigate the rest of this week. Today and tomorrow constitute what I think of as the triage window. In emergency medicine, triage is the process of sorting patients by urgency. Not treating everyone, sorting. Determining what needs immediate attention, what can wait, and what will resolve on its own. The 48 hours after an eclipse operates similarly. Material surfaces. Not all of it requires immediate response. Some of it is urgent, the intolerance signal pointing at something that needs to change soon. Some of it is important but not urgent, the simplification signal clarifying a decision that can be executed next week or the week after. And some of it is informational, the exhale signal showing you what was released, which requires no action at all, only acknowledgement. Here is the triage method I use after every eclipse. Take a piece of paper. Draw 3 columns. Label them Act, Plan, and Note. In the Act column, write anything the eclipse surfaced that requires response within 7 days. These are the intolerable items, the things your system can no longer sustain. In the Plan column, write anything that requires response but can be planned for mid-March or later. These are the simplified decisions. You know what to do, but the timing is not immediate. In the Note column, write anything that surfaced as informational. The exhale, the lightness, the awareness of something that shifted without requiring action. Most eclipse material belongs in the Note column. Some belongs in Plan. Very little belongs in Act. If your Act column has more than 2 items, you are probably mis-sorting. The eclipse is a reading, not a fire alarm. Very few readings require same week action. Most require same month integration. The discipline of sorting prevents the reactive over-response that wastes eclipse energy on premature action. The mistake most people make in the first 48 hours after an eclipse is treating everything as urgent. Every revelation demands immediate action. Every clarity must be communicated now. Every ending must be formalized today. That approach wastes the triage window. The skill is sorting. What needs attention now? What needs attention next week? What needs no attention, only recognition? Sort first, act later. The integration of eclipse material inside Mercury retrograde is the specific challenge of the next 2 weeks. The eclipse showed you something clearly. Mercury retrograde is preventing you from communicating that clarity to others. This creates an unusual state that I think of as the private revolution. You know what shifted. You can feel it. The eclipse was clear. But every time you try to explain it, the words come out wrong. The email does not capture what you mean. The conversation misses the point you are trying to make. This is not a problem with your eclipse reading. It is a problem with the transmission channel, and the channel does not fully clear until Mercury stations direct on March 20th, which means for the next 2.5 weeks you are carrying eclipse clarity through a communication fog. The practical advice is simple, though not easy. Trust the clarity. Do not trust the expression of it yet. Act where action requires no explanation. Hold where action requires articulation. And wait for the Mercury cazimi on March 7th for a brief 24-hour window where you can check whether the eclipse reading still holds when the communication channel briefly clears. 3 things to watch through Sunday. First, track the intolerance signal over the next 72 hours. If the same area of life keeps triggering the intolerance response, the eclipse is pointing there persistently, and that persistence means the change required is not minor. The more consistent the signal, the more significant the restructuring needed. Second, notice if any old conversations or old relationships resurface this week. Mercury retrograde inside the eclipse window often brings back people or topics from the past that relate to the eclipsed house. These are not random. They are the eclipse delivering context. The past person or topic shows you where the current pattern originated. Third, pay attention to your energy levels through Sunday. Eclipse aftermaths have a specific energy signature. A dip on day 1 or 2, followed by a surge around day 4 or 5. The dip is processing. The surge is the new clarity beginning to generate momentum. If you feel unusually tired today and tomorrow, that is normal. The surge comes. Here is where it lands. The eclipse happened. The reading has begun. You have your initial signals. The film is developing. And over the next 14 days, the picture will get clearer and more detailed and more useful. Your job right now is not to act on every piece that surfaces. Your job is to sort, to triage, to recognize what needs immediate attention and what needs time. To trust the clarity, even when you cannot yet speak it clearly. I said in the very first video of this series, back on February 23rd, that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction had delivered something real, something structural, something that was not prediction but observation. 11 days later, the eclipse has read that structure under its harshest light. And I am watching people discover that what landed on February 20th survived the entire sequence. The retrograde could not shake it. The Pisces immersion could not dissolve it. Mars-Uranus could not break it. And the eclipse, with its removal of every layer of borrowed light, could not erase it. What crystallized was real. And now you can see it clearly in the post-eclipse morning without any filter between you and the structure. That is what this entire series has been building toward, not the eclipse itself, the day after, when you see what survived. The eclipse gave you something last night, something that survived when the borrowed light went out. Now your only task is to see it for what it is without adding anything to it and without taking anything away. Watch for the three signals. Document what surfaces. Use the triage columns. And stay with me through the integration window. The eclipse photograph is still developing. The sharpest details are yet to come.